This is a 25 by 40 building, recently completed. Colors: evergreen, wainscot, roof, trim, soffit, and then pewter gray would be the wall color. If you look at other builders, the way they do the Z-trim, it's a larger piece of trim, and it's just a very simple Z-trim. If you look at our Z-trim, it actually has another additional bend, and it actually has a seam underneath it. We actually roll our own steel and our own trim, so we can accommodate that very, very nicely. All of our buildings come in with base trim at the base of the panel. The sidewall steel actually sits right on top of that trim, so it seals up very nicely, prevents rodents from coming in through the major rib and into the building. A lot of other builders don't provide that trim. They might even provide it with maybe a rubber closure, but the rodents still could chew through that. One thing about our soffit panel, that's made out of steel. We used to use aluminum years ago. We found out that aluminum was much more flexible, and then when you had high winds, for example, the aluminum soffit would actually pop out of the trims or blow up into next to the roof metal. So with steel, it's much stronger. We're 12 inches on center in the rib panel. We're 7/8 from the flat of the steel to the upper rib. A lot of other companies, they're either 5/8 or 3/4. So we're a higher rib panel. Higher rib panel just represents that it's much stronger in performance. And we have 3 small enhancement ribs between our major rib. We put 6 bends in the high rib of the panel. There again, it adds beauty to the panel, but also adds additional strength value to the panel. We have the corner trims. Since we bend our own corner trims, we can put on some additional enhancement bends. You can about imagine if it's just a flat piece of trim, which a lot of the other builders and companies do, you can get an oil canning effect to it. And that's the reason why we put the additional bends in, is we reduce that flatness of the steel, and it reduces the oil canning effect and also provides some aesthetics to the building. And the gable trim, it's all bent the same way. There again, you can see the additional bends we put in the gable trim up at the angle of the roof line. Lumber takes on moisture, so when you got a lot of moisture in the air, lumber takes on moisture, and 6 months from now, that lumber, if you didn't brace it, that lumber could twist and turn. All the other companies that are in this post frame business, they just put the wall gird on, it might waver in and out, and it's just, that is the way it is. We actually have the wall gird, and we actually tee it with another 2x4, and the reason for that is it keeps that sight line nice and straight. Is it additional material? Yes. Is it additional labor? Yes. But we feel it's a real benefit for the building and how it performs and how the building looks long term. This door is our heavy duty XP door, heavy duty steel leaf and also heavy duty steel frame around. It's trimmed off with nice trim like this. This is what we call our seat cap trim. All the other builders that do the trimming of doors, for example, they use just regular J-trim. We actually use a C-trim. It actually hides the cut edge of that steel, so it actually tucks underneath that trim, and you don't even see it. So the nice thing about that is if you're coming down like this, you don't happen to catch it and cut your finger, but also from a sight line standpoint, it's nice and clean. It's easy if you're carrying something, you can hit it with your elbow or finger and that sort of stuff, so lever locks are really important in door leaves. This is an upgraded type of latch system in the doors. Also, this door has a latch guard. Overhead doors are really flashed off in the same manner. It's got the same piece of C-trim. One thing that we do differently than all the other builders, we actually reduce the flat portion of the overhead doors, because this is a large piece of area that can oil can. So when you get a dark color like green or brown or black, it really shows the oil canning. And so by reducing that, it provides some aesthetics to the trimming, but also reduces the space for the oil canning to take place. And comes in with the weather stripping, which seals up very nicely for the overhead door. This particular project has translucent pylon material, which allows natural lighting to go inside the building, so they don't have to flip a light on every single time they open the door and go in. And then getting into the framing system, this is the wall girt. Southern yellow pine and Doug fir. Most other builders use an SPF lumber, which is spruce pine fir. It's extremely soft, easy to work with. And Lester's over the years have found out that higher strength material, which is Southern yellow pine and Doug fir material, provides the wind design in the buildings very nicely versus the spruce pine fir material. If you look at, this is the wainscot elevation. You probably noticed that this is the T-girt that I was talking about. And this is what keeps the sight line nice and straight. This is the 2x6 on the outside of the column. And then this is the 2x4 that we actually install. And it's an L-shaped format. It's basically a 2x6, and then we just take the 2x4 and nail it together like that. All 2x8 treated baseboard around the perimeter. All of our columns, for example, and all of our treated material, that's all warranted for 50 years. This is the panel connection right here. This is the seam. And this is the under panel, and this is the panel that laps over. And this is what they call the purlin bearing. And the purlin bearing is what gives the under panel the strength, because it supports the steel. It goes from member to member, wood to wood, purlin to purlin. On the roof, the walls, it's essentially done the same way. A lot of companies don't do that. Basically, they cut it off right here at this point. It can waver in and out. With the additional bend and also the purlin bearing, it gives additional strength. A lot of other builders put the truss on the one side of the column, either this side or this side. We go in the center. And the reason for that is if you get a tremendous amount of snow on the roof, there's a tremendous amount of weight that's on the roof. And that weight has to get transferred down to the footing. So it goes through the truss, through the roof, and through the column and down to where the footing is located. By having the truss in the center ply, now all three plies work together as a unit as it transfers the weight through the heart or through the center of the column. If you have the truss to one side of the column, now you're creating a tremendous amount of stress on just one side of the column. And long term, that column wants to bend like this if it has a lot of weight, time in and time again. We've got the diagonal wall bracing to brace the building. One thing that really is nice about our system is the way we do our roof system. If you look at the trusses in this case, are spaced at 8 foot on center. And we have a 2x6 roof purlin that goes from truss to truss. We have a steel saddle hanger pocket that slips right over the top of the truss. So everything is flushed in between. The entire roof system works together as a unit. And you can about imagine if you take a building, you have a truss like this and you have a 2x4 over the top, and they rely on a 6-inch pole bar nail going through that 2x4 into that truss, or they actually toe nail that 2x4 over the top of the truss. Long term, you know that has to have some effect on the building, how it performs. And that's why we believe and a firm believer of the 2x6 in between. It just interlocks together. And you can see the additional strength value. 2x6 versus a 2x4, that's 50% more wood that we put in our roof system compared to everybody else. And just by interlocking in between, it just adds tremendous strength value to the building. We put on bird netting. A lot of companies don't put it in. It doesn't cost a lot of money, but it's really a nice feature, especially 3 years from now when your soffit is full of birds and you're wondering how you're going to get them out of there. A lot of companies, they have a 2x4 over the top of truss, and they might have one nail going through the 2x4 into the bottom quarter of the truss. And you can about imagine if you sustain some high winds, there is a tremendous amount of shifting that could happen. And we go in between. So in the roof purlins in between, our bottom chord spaces are in between, it just makes the building much more solid. And that's really what Lester's is all about, is really long-term performance in the building. You can see how we encompass the entire structure and how everything fits together as one solid piece. Everything works together as a unit. That's how our buildings perform. You can about imagine if you take an 80 wide and 120 feet in length and maybe 18 or 20 feet in height, and the system is exactly the same. So you can see when you go larger in width and larger in length and even taller, how all of those pieces still interact together and how it makes the building much more solid from an engineering standpoint, also from a performance standpoint too.